Hello everyone, and welcome to this new tutorial series for Doddle TV designed to get you up and running in Adobe's After Effects as quickly as possible. My name is Kevin P. McAuliffe, and I've been an After Effects user for over 15 years. Now, most people know me as a media composer, editor, and trainer, but believe it or not, many days I actually spend more time in After Effects than I do inside of Media Composer. Now, I've decided to break down the first 5 lessons into ones that I think are the most important for you to know to get you up and running as quickly as possible. Now, lesson 1 is all about importing and how to get your footage into After Effects, whether you're importing a single clip or you're coming from a non-linear editing application. If you're an editor looking to learn After Effects, we're going to look at the easiest way to get from Premiere Pro, Final Cut Pro 10, and Media Composer into After Effects to start your compositing as quickly as possible. Okay, let's get started. Okay, now of course the first thing I do want to point out is that I am working on a Mac right now, but that's really irrelevant. Mac or Windows, I'm going to be giving you the shortcuts for both systems. Everything is going to work exactly the same. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to Command Tab if you're on the Mac, obviously Alt and Tab if you're on Windows, into Adobe's After Effects CC 2015. Now, of course, there's a whole bunch of different windows and panels that all do different things. But again, like I said, in this first lesson, we're not going to focus on any of that. I don't want to overwhelm you in the first lesson because in most cases, what people just want to do right away is get their footage in and get it in correctly. So let's talk about the most basic way of getting footage into Adobe's After Effects. And we're going to talk individual clips now, and that is by doing a basic import. Now, a basic import can be done one of 2 ways. You can simply navigate over to the project window and right-click, come down to import, and you'll notice that we have a whole bunch of different options in here. Right now, we're only going to focus on 2 of them, file and multiple files. Now, of course, because there's many ways to do the same thing in all of the Adobe applications, we of course can also navigate up to file. We can come down to import. We have the same option right here. Or what we can even do if we want to, and I'm just going to drag After Effects over here just a little bit. I'm going to come to my hard drive here. I'm going to come into my footage folder right here. I'm just going to grab any clip here. It doesn't matter which one. I'm going to grab a basketball clip. I can also simply grab and drag and drop clips into the After Effects interface just like that. And that clip has now been imported. Now, I actually did want to bring in a clip that was 23976 because what I also want to do here is simply right click. Let's come down to import. Now, to import a file or multiple files is essentially exactly the same. So what I'm going to do is navigate to file. Again, the shortcut Command and I if you're on the Mac, Control and I if you're on Windows. And let's come here to a different type of footage that I have inside of my Elephants folder. I'll just come down to elephants.mov. I'll simply say open. And the reason that I wanted to bring this file in is because I now have 2 different types of files. I have an interlace file, which is the Elephants file, and I have a progressive file, which is this basketball shot. Now, you're going to notice that as soon as I click on any one of these clips, After Effects is going to give me a lot more information about the clip. You'll see that as soon as I click on the Elephants clip, I can see that the clip is 1440 by 1080 with a 1.33 pixel aspect ratio, and it is upper field dominant. This clip is HDV. Now, that is something that I do want to point out because it's exceptionally important. If you're working in an interlace format in North America, anything that you're working in 1080i will be upper field dominant, and if you're working in standard definition, that will be lower field dominant. Now, if you happen to bring in footage that you know is 1080i, we'll just use that as the example, which is 1080i, which should be upper field first, and After Effects is not telling you that it's separating the fields to make it upper field first, you're going to need to give After Effects a little sort of poke in the right direction and just say, oh, by the way, After Effects, this clip is actually upper field dominant. So how do we go about doing that? Well, what we can do is with any clip inside of After Effects, we can simply right click on it and come down to Interpret Footage and come to Main. Now again in here, there's a whole bunch of options that we have. Really right now, I only want to focus on one of them, and it's right down here, and it's called Fields and Pull Down. You'll see the very first option that we have is to separate fields, and in this case, because After Effects already saw the flagging QuickTime that this file was upper field dominant, it separated the fields for me. But you'll see that if I had switched this to off and said OK, and the clip had actually come in like this, and I knew that it was 1080i, what I would want to do is right click, come down to Interpret Footage, come to Main, and I just simply want to come down to Fields and Pull Down and switch that to be upper and say OK. Now what's important to keep in mind is that as you work through the process of doing your compositing in After Effects, when you get to the rendering stage, you'd want to make sure that you retain that
But we're actually going to talk about rendering in lesson 2. People a lot of times say, Kev, why would you talk about, rendering in lesson 2? Because let's be honest, after you watch lesson 1, you're going to get in and start playing around with clips and stuff in After Effects, and you're going to want to get that footage out of After Effects. That's why I always talk about exporting second when I teach people After Effects, because really importing and exporting are two of the things that you're going to be doing all the time inside of After Effects. Okay, so let's continue. Now, one last thing that I do want to mention is that if you ever actually want to see your clip and actually take a look at it large, what you can do is simply double click on the clip, and you're going to notice now that the footage window is going to open, and I can just simply drag through and check this clip out. Or of course, if you wanted to, you could hit the space bar, and I can see in the upper right hand corner here that I'm actually getting in this case it just sort of dropped down for me in real time, but there we go. Now it's back to being real time. A real time playback of my clip inside of After Effects. Lightning quick. Very nice. And of course we can do that with the other clip as well. Again, simply hit the space bar. What's going to happen is that After Effects is going to buffer the clip into your system's RAM, and then when it's got it buffered there, it's going to play it back in real time. Now, of course, the green bar represents what is being buffered. And you'll see that this clip is actually fairly long. It's about 18 seconds. It's probably doing this in somewhat real time. We're probably at about 18 seconds right about now. And here we go, real time. There we go. Very cool. Okay, so what I want to do now, because really at its most basic, that's how you're going to get individual clips or even multiple clips into Adobe's After Effects. But let's talk about the real meat and potatoes of working in After Effects, especially when we're talking about importing, and that is coming from a nonlinear editing application, because in most cases that's going to be your workflow. If you're an editor, you're going to be working, you're going to say, oh, you know what, I'd really like to send these clips to After Effects to do some green screen or some tracking or something like that. And you really don't want to have to go in and export individual clips from Media Composer, from Final Cut, from Premiere to get them into After Effects to start working with. You'd really like to export chunks of your composition. Well, let me show you how you're going to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm simply going to hide Adobe's After Effects. And I think what we're going to do is we'll start with talking about Premiere, because obviously Premiere, After Effects, all part of the Adobe family. So let's talk about Premiere Pro first. What I'm going to do is simply Command and Tab into Premiere Pro CC 2015. Obviously, that's an Alt and Tab for all my Windows friends out there. And you'll see that I've created a very basic timeline. What I did though is just for fun, I decided to add a little bit of a picture-in-picture here, just that it wasn't just straight cuts. So we got a little bit of a picture-in-picture moving across the screen. Our background will cut from one shot to another. And there we go. Okay. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to take this and, maybe we need to do some color grading or some tracking or something like that to this footage. And we're going to want to send it to Adobe's After Effects. Now, if you're a Premiere Pro editor working in Premiere and you want to send this timeline to Adobe's After Effects, it's actually very simple. Now, what I want to make sure of is before I do that, I'm just going to close my After Effects project here. We'll just say close. I'm not going to save that. We'll just hide After Effects here. And all I'm going to do inside of Premiere is I'm simply going to select the range of clips that I want to send to After Effects. I'm going to right click on them. I'm going to move right up here to replace with After Effects composition. And as soon as I click on it, the first thing that After Effects is going to say to me is, well, hold on a second. What do you want to call this new project that you're going to be creating? So let's just call it For After Effects from Premiere. Since I called that project when I saved it that, let's just call this After Effects project the same thing. All I'm going to do now is simply say save. As soon as I say save, you're going to see that a new composition has been opened in After Effects. And all I'm going to do is simply just drag down it. And what I actually have is that exact animation now rebuilt for me inside of Adobe's After Effects. Very cool. Now, of course, we could get in, start doing our compositing, do whatever we want to do. But let me give you a flip situation. What if I'm, junior After Effects person, I've just come into my first job, and I'm working with a Premiere Pro editor who's going to be giving me stuff that he's edited for me to get in and do compositing with inside of After Effects, and I don't know Premiere. But I do know that Premiere and After Effects work hand in hand together. So do I have the ability to work with a Premiere Pro editor who's doing their thing inside of After Effects independently. Well, believe it or not, I do. What I'm going to do again is I'm just going to close this project. And I did save that Premiere Pro project onto the desktop for a reason. Now, it's actually a good thing that I came back into Premiere here, because you'll see that what's actually happened now is that the layered element that I had created inside of Premiere has actually been replaced with an Adobe After Effects project. So what that actually means is that if you had let's say an artist get in and create a very cool animation, they don't even need to render that project out. All they have to do is save it. You can import it into Premiere and drop it into your timeline. Okay, but what I was going to show you is that on the desktop, you'll see that I've saved a Premiere Pro project, that specific Premiere Pro project that I have up in my timeline. And again, I'm, After Effects user, I don't know anything about Premiere. What I need to do is just get into After Effects and start working with timelines that have already been laid out for me by an editor. So how do I do that? Well, it's actually very simple. All I'm going to do is Command Tab back into Adobe's After Effects. I'm going to navigate up to File. I'm going to come down to Import. I'm going to come to Import Adobe Premiere Pro Project. Of course, After Effects is going to prompt me for the project. What's very cool is that when I select the project and say Open, the first thing that After Effects says is, oh, okay, well, which sequences would you like to bring in? So what you could do if you wanted to is bring in everything, or if it's only one sequence, let's say the editor made a sequence called, Clips for After Effects, I can simply drop that down, go right down to that sequence, simply select it, say OK, and literally in a matter of seconds, again, that project is going to be imported into After Effects, and I don't need to know one thing about Premiere to do it. Very cool. So you can see that the interoperability between Premiere and After Effects is very, very cool, very simple, and I hope that it would be, because they are part of obviously the Creative Cloud family. But what happens when we start straying outside of that family and we start talking about other non-linear editing applications? In our next example, like Final Cut Pro 10. Let me show you how we're going to take footage from our Final Cut Pro 10 timeline and move it over seamlessly into Adobe's After Effects. Okay, so let's Command and Tab into Final Cut Pro 10. Now, obviously there is no Alt and Tab for Windows users because Final Cut Pro 10 is a Mac-only application. Now, what I've done is just attempt to rebuild what we had in Premiere here inside of Final Cut Pro 10. Again, nothing fancy by any stretch of the imagination. Basically just 3 shots with a picture-in-picture moving across it. Now you'll remember back to when we worked in Final Cut Pro 7, we had the ability to simply select some clips, right-click, send to motion, much like we did inside of Premiere Pro. A little bit different now inside of Final Cut Pro 10. What we're actually going to want to do is to work with an XML file, which is basically an information document that we're going to send from Final Cut into After Effects to tell After Effects what clips we want to import and where we want them to be composited in a new composition. So all I'm going to do is simply navigate up to File, and I'm going to come down to Export XML. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to overwrite the one that I have here on the desktop, which is perfectly fine, and I'm simply going to leave everything the way that it is, metadata view extended, XML version 1.5, that's all good. I'm simply going to say Save, and I'm going to say Replace. What I'm going to do is when this is done exporting, you see it literally only took a matter of seconds to export that file. I'm simply going to hide Final Cut Pro 10, and I'm going to Command and Tab into Adobe's After Effects. Now, we have the ability inside of After Effects to import not only AAF files from Avid Media Composer, but also XML files as well, using the Pro Import for After Effects import setting. Now, Pro Import for After Effects used to be Automatic Duck Pro Import that was purchased by Adobe a few years ago, and you'll see that it's been incorporated into After Effects right here. Now in most cases, what people think that you have to do is simply select it. What we're going to do then is navigate to the XML file right here, simply say Open. The only problem is that After Effects gives you an error. Well, the reason that it does this is because you can't just take an XML file from Final Cut into After Effects without an intermediary step that's going to convert that XML into one that After Effects likes a little bit more, that gives it the information that it's looking for. Now, you're going to need a third-party tool to do that. What I'm going to do, simply Command and Tab into the App Store, and the application that you're going to want to use is called X2CC. Now, most people immediately think, oh man, Kevin, $57.99, that's crazy, that's too expensive. Let me tell you something. If you work in Final Cut Pro 10 and you're serious about working in After Effects, you absolutely 100% need this tool. It is worth every penny because you're going to see how simple it is not only to use this tool, but then to get your XML into After Effects to start working with. Let me show you what I mean. all I'm going to do is with that XML file, I am going to navigate. Now for me, because I'm using a legacy version of X2CC, mine is actually called, and it's right down here, it's called Project X7, which is sort of the precursor to what X2CC ended up becoming. So I'm just going to use this one here. All I'm going to do is simply select for After Effects. Now, of course, again, this works exactly the same in X2CC. All I'm going to do is simply say open. You'll see that it's going to say, well, what do you want to use? What roles do you want to use? I want to use video. You know, in this case, because my composition is very basic, this window is just very basic. But what I want to do is make sure that I include all clips, and I'm simply just going to say OK. I'm now going to be prompted to rename this clip, but why rename it? I'm just going to call it the same thing. I'll just simply say save. It's going to appear on the desktop just like such. And now all I'm going to do is just Command and Tab back into Adobe's After Effects. I'm going to right click. I'm going to say Import, Pro Import After Effects. I'm going to select that new X7 document right here. I'm simply going to say open, and guess what I now have? I now have that exact composition inside of Adobe's After Effects from Final Cut Pro 10, just like it came from Premiere Pro. Literally that simple. Again, like I said, if you're serious about doing work inside of Adobe's After Effects and you work inside of Final Cut Pro 10, then Intelligent Assistance's X2CC is an absolute must-buy. Okay, now one last thing that I do want to mention about X2CC is that not everything will translate over from Final Cut Pro 10 into Adobe's After Effects. So what I encourage you to do is that once you've decided to make your purchase of X2CC, head on over to the Intelligent Assistance website, and you can check out the documentation that will tell you everything that's supported in the move from X to Adobe's After Effects. So this way you can remember that when you are sending your files back and forth, so that you're not really caught off guard by anything that might not show up. Okay, so let's talk about the last example now that we have. Let's talk about moving our Media Composer timeline into Adobe's After Effects. Okay, so last but certainly not least, let's talk about Avid Media Composer. We're going to Command and Tab into Avid Media Composer, obviously again because we're now talking about an NLE that's on both OSs, Alt and Tab for all my Windows friends. Let's get into Avid Media Composer. I am using the most recent version of Media Composer 8.4, but basically the technique I'm going to show you goes back a lot of versions. So chances are that if you're working on a version pre-8.4, this technique will probably work for you. Okay, now what I've done is, again, I've just created a very basic timeline, pretty much an homage to what we'd created inside of Premiere and inside of Final Cut Pro 10. And what we want to do is we want to take this, and we're not going to be exporting it as an XML file because we don't have the ability to do that inside of Avid Media Composer. But Pro Import for After Effects supports not only XML, but you probably remember hearing me say that it supports AAF files as well. So how do we export an AAF file from Avid Media Composer? Well, let me show you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and I'm going to come down to export. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new export setting, and we're going to call it appropriately enough for Adobe's After Effects. Now you'll see that by default inside the export settings, AAF is the default settings. What we want to do is use marks, which means use the in and out points. We'll use selected tracks, we'll include the inactive audio tracks, and we'll use AAF edit protocol. Now, depending if you want to send video and audio, you can choose to include all video and data tracks in the sequence and audio tracks if you want. But in this case, and then chances are in most cases, you're only going to be sending video only. So I'm just going to leave include all video checked, and I'm not going to select include audio tracks. And believe it or not, that's the only thing I'm going to do. I'm going to leave the export method as linked to, so we're not going to actually export any media from Media Composer. And we'll do a save as, and I'll call this for AE exports. And I'll simply say OK. All I'm going to do is just save that export preset, and let's send this to the desktop. We'll call this from Avid Media Composer. Okay, and all I'm going to do is simply say save. You're going to notice that the export literally takes about 2 seconds. Now obviously your mileage will vary depending on your system and how long your timeline is, but because this is a relatively short timeline, it exported lightning quick. You'll now see that on my desktop I have that AAF file right here. What I'm going to do now is simply Command and Tab into Adobe's After Effects. I'm now going to navigate over to File. I'm going to come down to Import. I'm going to come over to, of course, Pro Import for After Effects. I'm simply going to select that AAF file. I'm going to say Open, and literally in a matter of seconds, I'm now going to have my Media Composer timeline inside of Adobe's After Effects. Very cool. Now, something that I should mention is that I've pretty much been importing the XML and the AAF file, not getting in and adjusting any settings. But there are settings that do come along with Pro Import for After Effects. You'll see if I navigate back up to File, I come down to Import, I come to Pro Import for After Effects. You'll notice that right down here under Modify Settings, we do have quite a few options in here. Things like separating fields. Again, we were talking about if you're working with files that have field dominance, 1080i or standard definition, you can get in and set that field dominance right here. For FCP media, you can set file type on typeless media files, validate timecode of timecode media, and replace proxy footage with the actual red media files. You'll see for Avid media, what do you want to do? Do you want to connect the After Effects clips directly to the Avid media files in your Avid media files folder, or do you want to create QuickTime reference movies to Avid media files? Now you'll see that I have that selected, so therefore I'm just going to say OK and cancel, and you'll see that on my desktop I have a new folder that's been created with new QuickTime files. So After Effects is actually referencing these new QuickTime files that were made by Pro Import for After Effects. I'll just open them with QuickTime 7. There we go. Very, very cool. So again, let me just quit out of QuickTime here. We'll Command Tab back into Adobe's After Effects. Again, obviously Alt and Tab for all my Windows friends out there. Let's just come back to our Pro Import for After Effects, because like I was saying, we do have a lot of settings that we can get in and adjust, not only for the actual footage itself, but also for how your compositions are going to be set up inside of After Effects. Whether you want your layers to step up in the composition, step down in the composition, do you want to have a specific project size, and even get in and you can add labels with specific colors to the media if you want to. I highly recommend that once you start sending files from Media Composer into After Effects using Pro Import, even if you're sending it from Final Cut, get in, check out these settings, and really tailor them however you're going to need them to get the best and fastest possible workflow from Adobe's After Effects. Okay, so that wraps up our introductory look at importing clips into Adobe's After Effects. Now again, like I said in lesson 2, believe it or not, we're going to talk about exporting, because like I said earlier, in most cases you're going to want to just get your footage in, drop it into a composition, start working with it, start adding some effects, and in most cases you'll want to render that out to see what it looks like inside of your nonlinear editing application. That's why in most cases when I teach Adobe's After Effects, I teach exporting or rendering really right at the beginning to make sure that you can do your round tripping from your nonlinear editing application as quickly as possible. So if you have any questions, you have any comments, or you have any tutorial requests, you can send them to kevinpmcauliffe@gmail.com. This has been Kevin P. McAuliffe. Thanks a lot for watching.